The Life of Saint Augustine.
Bah, bah, bah.
Disclaimer: we apologize ahead of time if we pronounce any of the names incorrectly. Just as one would say tomato, another would say onion.
Saint Augustine was born November 13th in the year 354 in Thagaste, Numidia, which is now known as present-day Succoros, Algeria. He later died August 28th in the year 430, leaving him at 75 years old in Hippo Regius, Numidia, which is now present-day Annaba, Algeria.
His father Patricius was a pagan, unlike his mother Monica, who turned out to be an early Christian saint. His father Patricius was very supportive of his education, and at age 11, Augustine went to school at Medarus and became familiar with Latin literature. There he read the works of Cicero and became interested in philosophy.
At the age of 17, Augustine traveled to Carthage and continued his education in rhetoric.
During his early years of education, Augustine certainly did not lead an ordinary life.
When he was younger, he took part in a hedonistic lifestyle, which equates to only doing things that address your momentary pleasure, which in modern day we call YOLO.
You only live once, that's the motto.
To fulfill a lot of his desires, Augustine turned to the act of coitus, or sexual intercourse, in order to feel all right with himself.
During this time, he was once quoted, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet," which in modern day terms means, I want to have morals, but maybe later.
During his youth, he had an affair with a woman in Carthage for 13 years, in which they spawned a son named Adeodatus.
While living this hedonistic lifestyle, Augustine found doubts within God and left to study the religion of Manichaeism.
Manichaeism saw the world as light or dark, and with this understanding of the world, Augustine threw away his morals in order to serve his hedonistic lifestyle.
While all of this is going on, Augustine taught grammar and rhetoric at Carthage in the years 373 to 383. He later left to go to Rome and establish his own school, where he soon became dissatisfied with his students. While being dissatisfied, Augustine decided to leave and take up a new job as being a professor for the imperial court at Milan in the year 384.
It was at this point in his life that Augustine began turning away from Manichaeism after meeting with Faustus of Mileve, a major Manichaean bishop. While in Milan, he met a variety of characters, one of which is Saint Ambrose, a very prolific speaker of Christianity.
Augustine was first impacted by Christianity when he went to go hear this great preaching. Witnessing this, Augustine received a new understanding and view of the Bible and its scriptures.
Just like Augustine, Ambrose was a master of rhetoric.
One of the greatest impacts that helped Augustine to make up his mind and convert to Christianity was after hearing and reading works of St. Anthony of the Desert from his fellow friends and students back in the day.
St. Anthony of the Desert focused on a life of monasticism. In other words, he devoted himself to a service of spiritual work as a monk. After having exposure to these prolific influences, Augustine decided in the year 386 to prepare for his own baptism.
In April of the year 387, Augustine was baptized. While leaving Milan and traveling home, his son and his mother passed away. Although Augustine was very upset with what had happened, he knew that his mother was proud of him, knowing that he had converted to Christianity and followed in her footsteps.
While in Hippo, Augustine became a priest in the year of 391. 4 years later, he was ordained as the bishop of Hippo. Augustine was born into a great but despairing Roman Empire. Early in the 300s, Constantine was emperor, and in the year 313, he inducted the Edict of Milan, which allowed for the tolerance of all religions. As a Christian himself, Constantine spearheaded the Council of Nicaea. This council gave the Church the Nicene Creed, which gave us the idea of God's monistic presence through Jesus. After Constantine's death, he left the empire to his 3 sons, and as a result, there was a split within the empire. In the year 337, when Constantine died, to the year 364, when Augustine was only 10 years old, the empire had no real sense of self. What the Romans were left with was a Western Roman Empire and an Eastern one that turned into the Byzantine Empire. After shifting through many different emperors, the Western Roman Empire had become susceptible to attack. Many different groups had plundered their way through the European half of the empire over the course of 10 years and eventually found their way to Hippo, Augustine's home. It was on his deathbed that Augustine had witnessed the end of such a great civilization, and in the midst of this crisis, he remained faithful to God. Augustine was influenced by many philosophers such as Plato and Neoplatonists such as Plotinus. Their emphasis on the hierarchy of matter and spirituality gave Augustine the idea of the greatest good in life being God's salvation, a supreme intellect that reaches beyond all matter. Augustine's influence has found its way through many facets of Christian life, from the idea of the Trinity to the idea of God's salvation.
Although St. Augustine wrote many pieces of literature, we are focusing on two of his most important pieces of writing, which are Confessions and De Civitate Dei, or City of God. The first piece of work we will be talking about is St. Augustine's Confessions.
Watch this. These are my confessions. Just when I thought I said all I can say.
Confessions is regarded as the first autobiography in Western literature. It is important to note that Confessions was written in his early 40s, so it's not a full autobiography. It focuses mostly on his conversion to Christianity.
Confessions is a work where Augustine looks back on his life in a way to understand where he was in relationship to God. For example, his regret of following Manichaeism is highlighted in Confessions. He also reflects on his sinful behavior in his earlier life, like his affair in Carthage, which we mentioned earlier.
We will now move on to his second work, which is City of God. City of God was written in 413, which is 3 years after Rome is sacked by the Visigoths. The sacking of Rome is influential because the first part critiques Roman culture and pagan philosophy.
The second part of this piece is dealing with the relationship of the city of God and the city of man. The difference between the city of God and the city of man is that the city of God is full of people who fill their lives with the love of God, and the city of man fills themselves with the love of self. This narrative looks at the two cities as being parallel to one another throughout human history. The thing about the city of God is that Augustine views it as one that would last forever, whereas the city of man is ultimately doomed.
A lot of St. Augustine's critical ideas and cosmological interpretations come from his major works. One of the main ideas of Augustine was the thought of love. He once said, "My weight is my love. Wherever I am carried, my love is carrying me." When Augustine said this, he was referring to the two different types of love derived from the city of God. These two types of love are the love of God and the love of self. The love of self, in other words, is the thought of those who love the world through the bodily part of their nature and will live a life leading down to the deep depths of hell. This was Augustine at a young age, enjoying life and worshiping the love of his own self-desire through pleasure, which also leads back to his previous practice in Manichaeism. The love of God, on the other hand, leads its soul of those that follow their highest spiritual aspirations. They will eventually rise beyond the starry firmament of heaven and up to the heaven of heaven from which they had fallen from. The main cosmological idea that Augustine was trying to reach was in the beginning how human beings were composed of the earth and the breath of God. This relates back to the two main points of love. Us humans are left with the decision and given the task of deciding our own fate. We either choose to live a life giving thanks and service to God, or we get caught up in our own self-desire and crash and burn into hell.
St. Augustine still influences our society today. In fact, many famous figures have looked towards St. Augustine to draw knowledge, most notably Martin Luther King Jr. when he quoted Augustine in the letter from Birmingham jail.
St. Augustine said, An unjust law is no law at all. Which means I have a right, even a duty, to resist. With violence or civil disobedience. You should pray I choose the latter.
Hey Rachel. This is on the credits.
Will you do the fandango? Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening me.
It's a Biggie beat. My Dougie, yeah. My Dougie, Lil Will. My Dougie, my Soldier Boy. She said she like my Dougie. I'm fresh. I got Lil Will in there. I'm fresh. Yeah, I'm here.
Check this out, baby girl. Why don't you check out a nigga? Man, I go to work. True winner. Jeans skinny like Squidward. Looking for your girl. Just missed it. Then my cat daddy and I took her down.
Sexy lady. Open Gangnam Style. Hey, sexy lady. Open Gangnam Style.